Hi, my name's Don Hahn, and I'm the producer of Disney's The Lion King and Beauty and the Beast. Having faced the task of adapting a well-known fairy tale for the screen, I know the challenges it represents. Cinderella is one of my favorite Walt Disney films. The characters, animation, and music work together to tell a near-perfect story. But believe it or not, there was a time when Walt Disney considered doing the movie in a very different way. In doing research for this Cinderella DVD, the Disney archivists unearthed a rare treasure. In an envelope that hadn't been opened since 1949, they found photographs of a full set of storyboards for a version of the film that was very, very different from the final film as we know it. Disney's Cinderella seems so effortless and graceful to us that you might not realize that Walt took almost 30 years to bring this beloved fairy tale to the screen. Looking back through the surviving documentation of years worth of treatments, storyboards, we can piece together a look at the Cinderella that almost was. Disney first tackled the Cinderella story in 1922 for his Kansas City animation studio called Laugh-O-Grams. Believe it or not, in its day, this was considered sophisticated animation. With his animation prowess considerably polished, Walt returned to the story in 1933 and planned to produce Cinderella as one of the Silly Symphony series. He sent a story treatment around the studio, along with a request for his artist to submit visual gags for the film.
That was the modus operandi. You could make yourself $5 if you did an acceptable gag. And these guys were knocking themselves out drawing these things.
It says a lot about Disney's talent as a storyteller that some of these earliest gags found their way into the final film.
When we had a meeting on Cinderella, it would be under Walt's supervision. He would add to this or take from it or maybe say, no, this isn't working.
For Walt, it obviously wasn't working in 1933 because the planned Silly Symphony was never made and the idea was set aside.
Sometimes it languished for years. He didn't know what to do next and they didn't, so he put it on the shelf. And then when he got an idea, he'd tell them to take it off and develop the way he suggested.
5 years later, Walt returned to the Cinderella story, this time starting with a draft by Disney writer Al Perkins. Over the next 10 years, Disney went through numerous writers, dozens of drafts, and thousands of storyboards as characters and storylines were developed and then abandoned in the quest for the perfect telling of the world's most famous fairy tale. In the first few years, they spent a lot of time developing the character of Prince Charming. In one version of early storyboards, the prince is introduced as a hunter, chasing a deer over a palace wall, only to reveal that the prince and the deer are friends.
Well, that might give us a chance to get a picture of the prince and not get too close to him. If you sell that idea, you don't have to be dragging him into the story.
But by the time the film went into production, the prince's role had shrunk to almost nothing. There have been many versions of the Cinderella story told throughout history. In most of them, Cinderella is assisted by animals.
Happy birthday!
But in the one we're most familiar with, the Charles Perrault version, Cinderella didn't have any animal friends. In some of the earliest drafts and storyboards, Cinderella had a pet turtle named Clarissa. The fairy godmother turned Clarissa into Cinderella's lady-in-waiting for the ball, and Clarissa fell hopelessly in love with the prince's valet, Spink.
The animals were very important to the story because Cinderella could play off of the animals and show her true feelings.
It was a lovely dream, too.
That's the type of character relationship that Walt loved.
All the little animals in each little group would have personalities. You'd also have some animals close to Cinderella in the house. Mice dressed up in clothes would be funny if we could find a reason for it.
The story team spent a lot of time and experimentation trying to decide if and how the animals would talk.
We might want the mice to talk. It might be very cute in there when they're working that they have little songs that they can sing.
He'd go around in circles till he very, very did.
In 1944, another talking animal was added to the cast. A gossiping crow named Jabber came and went in various drafts over the next few years.
The crow and all the animals can talk when Cinderella isn't around, and we'll tell some of our story through them. The crow can bring the news that the whole town is excited.
The crow could talk, the mice could talk, and the barnyard animals could talk. But in Disney's mind, the birds could only chirp. This led to several sequences in which the birds had to communicate with only pantomime, like when the birds first try to tell the other animals that Cinderella is going to the ball.
They come down chirping, excited, fly over to the horse, and the dog wants to know what the heck's the matter with them. And the horse, he says, they're trying to tell us something. And the dog says, why don't they learn to talk like we do?
Not being able to speak, the birds have to act it out.
The horse gets it. A ball. The horse says, get it? And the dog, whoosh, picks it up in his mouth. And so then the horse says, put it down, put it down.
In the end, Disney simplified the roles of all the animals, except the mice and the cat.
Walt would look at something somebody had slaved over and then just say, no, it's not working, and dismiss it and start again.
Actually, in story meeting, I found him to be completely reasonable, except when he said no to my ideas.
Walt Disney understood what a story needed, and what's really more important is what a story doesn't need.
Walt and his artists developed things the story didn't need with just as much creativity as they developed the things the story did need. For example, at one point they planned an elaborate montage of invitations to the ball being delivered throughout the town. It's filled with great visual gags, and as you can see, the sequence would have been hilarious. But in the end, Walt decided against it.
We have to pull out a lot of gags that are in just as gags. There's a time when you can gag a thing and times when you have to carry a certain sincere feeling if you want the story to hold.
After she returns home from the ball, some versions of the Cinderella story have her eavesdropping on her stepsisters.
And when they come home, they're talking about this beautiful princess. And Cinderella listens, and she's getting quite a kick out of it because they're talking about her.
But in the end, Walt decided it was more important to keep the story moving forward and not let Cinderella come off as spiteful.
Thank you. Thank you so much for everything.
Another set of storyboards proposed an ending for the film that would have been a little bit longer. After the glass slipper is found to fit, the Duke brings Cinderella to the palace, still dressed in her work rags.
The suspense of that is, what's the prince going to think when he sees her as she is? Well, the payoff has to be one where he doesn't give a darn what she's in. When he sees her, there she is. The godmother comes in at the right time, gives a gesture, and she's the beautiful princess again.
But at the last minute, Walt decided,
Now, we may want to get an ending more satisfying to the audience. They like to see a thing pay off, but not go on too long. The thought is, when the slipper fits, it's the lead-in to a celebration in the town, with all the bells ringing.
as late as 1948, Cinderella's story outlines included 2 musical fantasy sequences that ultimately did not make it into the film. After being told by her stepmother that she can attend the ball if she gets her chores done, Cinderella sings the Cinderella Work Song. Confronted by an enormous workload, she imagines herself multiplying into an army of scullery maids.
Don't have a chance. There are just 8 of us. How we hate the fate of us. All day long our backs are bent. If we had a wish to wish, we'd be a regiment.
The other unused song of interest was a variation on one of Walt's pet ideas, a concept that he tried to work into several of his films: the heroine and her Prince Charming dancing in the clouds. The beautiful artwork for this dancing on a cloud sequence reveals the Disney artists at their finest.
Walt would go over the songs with a fine-tooth comb, and he finally would choose the ones that looked like they worked or advanced the story. That was the main thing.
Despite all the work that went into them, both songs were ultimately replaced. The Cinderella work song kept its title, but became a different song sung most memorably by the mice.
Hurry, 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 gonna help our Cinderella.
So this is love.
Dancing on a Cloud was replaced by So This Is Love.
So this is love.
The pear-shaped toy.
In addition to songs being dropped, there was also a wonderful character developed who did not make it into the final film: the music teacher, Professor Lafouf.
There was a section with a music teacher, and I would have liked to have animated that teacher. I thought it'd be kind of fun to do, particularly if he would get exasperated with these horrible creatures he had to work with.
Professor Lafouf had the unenviable task of trying to teach the stepsisters to sing.
Oh, sing, sweet.
Every time one of the girls starts to sing, the animals in the barnyard start to make a commotion.
Above me. Oh, sing, sweet nightingale.
Thinking that the inhuman sounds were coming from the stepsisters, Lafouf would get exasperated.
He goes over, looks at her throat, and then he says, "We try again."
Oh, sing, sweet nightingale. Sing, sweet nightingale.
And then out comes something else, another animal. He can't figure it out. Then he has to break down in some way. Well, he thinks they're making fun of him. "Madame, do you realize who I am? You bring me here to make a jackass of me. What is this? Cock-a-doodle-doo. What is this? Arf, arf. Where am I? In a stable?" He puts his hat on and he goes galloping off with a whinny.
He would be adding all the time. He's building on this thing right up till the day that the picture is in the can, he's making changes.
Oh, sing, sweet.
This entire sequence was dropped at the last minute and simplified into the very brief singing lesson we see in the final film.
I guess it would have been extraneous material. Walt was very good at that, you know. He could tell when we got something that's slowing it down, stopping the story. He always played for the entertainment. He had such a strong feeling for entertainment.
Walt, when he focused on story possibilities, he focused on story possibilities. And he was also always looking for the little tear. If you could get people involved with a character, fine. Now get sympathy for the character, good. Now have something bad about to happen to the character. Now you got your audience.
Be careful we don't repeat. Keep moving and always end up with a hope or a despair.
Well, it took a long time to get there, down a winding road dotted with abandoned characters and forgotten storylines. But Walt Disney and his team of artists took this oldest of fairy tales and made it uniquely their own. And that is the Cinderella that is.